A warning that shoppers could face shortages of some foods within days because of the crisis in carbon dioxide supplies. The food and drink industry say poultry and pork are among the products that could be affected.
The government needs to solve this in the next few days. It's that urgent to avoid significant disruption in our stores.
Well, we'll have the very latest from our business editor also this lunchtime. A third man faces charges over the Salisbury poisonings. Police say Denis Sergeyev was part of the Russian intelligence hit squad that tried to kill Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Boris Johnson meets President Biden today, the first time they've had talks at the White House. The boy whose body was dumped in the River Thames after a ritual killing. 20 years on, detectives make a fresh appeal for information. Thousands more people flee the volcano that's erupted on the Spanish island of La Palma. And Prince Philip, the practical joker, as revealed by his family in a new documentary.
He used to get in a lot of trouble from my grandmother for covering most of the places we had lunch and things with mustard on the ceiling.
And coming up in sports later in the hour on the BBC News channel, we'll look ahead to this evening's internationals with all the home nations involved in Women's World Cup qualifiers.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. There's a warning today that shoppers will start noticing shortages of poultry, pork and bakery products within days as a result of the crisis in the supply of carbon dioxide. The food and drinks industry are calling for urgent action from the government to prevent empty shelves, possibly by the end of next week. CO2 is used for food packaging and for stunning livestock before slaughter. Spiralling energy costs have stopped operations at fertiliser plants, which produce carbon dioxide as a by-product. Coletta Smith has this report.
The sky-high price of gas is causing problems in all kinds of areas. It's not just utility bills that are going up, it's your shopping bill too. Manufacturers will be passing on those higher costs by charging us more for everything that we're buying, particularly for meat, where there's been such a crisis caused by that hike in gas prices that we're likely to see prices go up within the week. That's because the carbon dioxide needed by the food industry is produced using lots of natural gas, which is now so expensive that one company, CF Industries, has closed its plants. But the government say they're prepared to step in.
Time is of the essence, and that's why I spoke to the CEO. I've spoken to him twice in the last 2 days, and we're hopeful that we can get something sorted today and get the production up and running in the next few days. You know, between nationalisation and simply doing nothing, there are lots of different options.
For those in the food industry, that can't come a moment too soon.
The government needs to solve this in the next few days. It's that urgent to avoid significant disruption in our stores. We think there's still a window to act. We think if the government takes some action, particularly with the fertiliser factory, get that back on stream, we can avoid disruption.
As for the energy providers who are struggling, there's no solution yet. Bailouts for smaller providers have been ruled out, but that means big government loans will be given to the remaining providers to get them to take on customers of failed firms. If your provider collapses, you'll be automatically transferred to another one. You won't lose any credit you've already built up, but you might be put onto a new tariff and charged at a higher rate. Many just can't afford that.
I did just get a bill through and it's going up twice the amount that we normally pay, so that's not great.
I think it's about winter time will be the telling time, I think, for them.
So as the weather turns and the heating is flicked on more often, everyone's budgets will need to tighten. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
Well, with me, our business editor Simon Jack. The government's under real pressure to act now on this carbon dioxide shortage.
Yeah, there's a meeting going on as we speak between Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, with the head of the Cabinet Office and also the chief secretary to the Treasury. And what they're trying to do is thrash out how they're going to get money to a company called CF, which has these big fertiliser plants which provide 60% as a byproduct of the CO2 in the UK. I think it's extraordinary that they're doing that, and I think it is the fact that they're thinking of subsidising a US-owned private company to switch their processes back on is a real measure of how urgent they realise this is. And I've been speaking to food producers today, and they say we've got days to fix this, and it's a crucial window. We're packing up stuff for Christmas, so if we don't get this sorted, a really big deal. So I think there's a 50% chance we might get some movement on that today. They're also looking at other sources, and they said it's amazing, given the coverage the story has had, how many people are coming forward saying, actually, I've got some CO2 that you can have. So that's that issue. We might get some movement on that today. We probably won't get any issue on the root cause of this, which is the high energy prices. The government saying the price cap has got to stay, and that's fine. You insulate customers, but you then see lots and lots of providers go bust because what happens when the cost of what you're selling is higher than the price at which you are allowed to sell to. So as Coletta was saying there, big loans possibly underwritten by government to allow the big companies to take on some of these loss-making accounts. But I think we're a couple of days away before they wrestle that root issue to the ground.
But the government have got to act on that issue as well. As you say, the root cause, the spiralling gas prices.
They are, yeah, and the point is that one way or another, we're going to end up paying for this crisis. It's going to cost billions of pounds, and that will either find its way back into our energy bills or it'll come out of taxpayer funds. But there's no shortcut to this. It's going to be painful. And as Kwasi Kwarteng said this morning, it could be a difficult winter.
Simon, thank you very much. Simon Jack, our business editor. A third man has been accused over the Salisbury nerve agent poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter. The Crown Prosecution Service has authorised charges against a Russian intelligence officer, Denis Sergeyev. And for the first time, British police have formally said they believe all three suspects were part of a team from the GRU Russian military intelligence. Well, meanwhile, the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Russia was also responsible for the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, a former spy who died of polonium poisoning in London in 2006. Gordon Carrera reports.
It was March 2018 when deadly nerve agent was deployed on the streets of Salisbury. The target, former Russian spy Sergei Skripal. He fell ill along with his daughter and a police officer after Novichok was smeared on his door handle. A local woman, Dawn Sturgis, died months later when she came into contact with the Novichok in a perfume bottle. Now a third suspect has been charged. This man, Denis Sergeyev, said to be a member of Russian military intelligence. Police have released this image of him arriving at Heathrow 2 days before the poisoning. The other two suspects arrived on a different flight and were captured on CCTV heading to Salisbury and in the town. Sergeyev stayed in London, but police believe the three met on multiple occasions and he's thought to have been the on-the-ground commander. He left on the day of the attack from Heathrow. The Kremlin has consistently denied any involvement.
They've got a doctrine of maskirovka, which is masking, which is denying everything and then throwing blame bombs out to other people. And they'll continue to do that. There's always a hope that if there is a change of government in Russia at some stage, that they will comply with the more rules-based approach of the rest of the free world.
Sergeyev is believed to be a member of the GRU, Russian military intelligence, and a unit involved in sabotage and assassination across Europe. The unit was involved in this explosion at an arms depot in the Czech countryside in 2014, and the poisoning in Bulgaria of an arms dealer in 2015, again using a deadly nerve agent, with Sergeyev alleged to be present on the ground. Since Salisbury, security services across Europe have been tracking the unit's past movements and trying to expose its work.
This whole unit that I think decades have been spent in creating, polishing, creating operational security algorithms and training people for this clandestine unit. They will have to scrap it and start from scratch. They will have to train new people. They have to look for alternative methods.
And in a separate development, today saw Russia accused by the European Court of Human Rights as being responsible for the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, That was carried out back in 2006 using radioactive polonium. But Russia has denied all these accusations. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
Let's go to our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg. So Russia accused once again in both the Skripal and the Litvinenko cases. What has been the reaction there in Moscow?
Well, Ben, there's been no official reaction to a third suspect being charged over the Salisbury poisonings. But what the Kremlin has reacted to today is the news that the European Court of Human Rights has found that Russia was responsible for the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, the former Russian agent who fled to Britain and was killed with radioactive polonium. So this is what the Kremlin spokesman said today about the court ruling. He said that these assertions that Russia was involved in Mr. Litvinenko's killing are baseless. We won't pay attention to such decisions. Now, that is Moscow's traditional response whenever it is accused of something, whether that something is the killing of Alexander Litvinenko, or involvement in the Salisbury poisonings, or involvement in the shooting down of the Malaysia Airlines MH17 flight over eastern Ukraine in 2014. The stock response from Moscow is, there is no evidence, these accusations are groundless, we're going to ignore them. And that goes for international court decisions too. I think it was 6 years ago that Russia adopted a law giving itself the right to overrule decisions by the European Court of Human Rights. We've also had some reaction from Andrei Lugovoy, who was one of the men suspected of poisoning Mr. Litvinenko in 2006. He called the decision, the ruling of the European Court of Human Rights, politically biased and said it undermined the court's reputation.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. Steve Rosenberg there in Moscow. The Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, has apologised for a data breach involving the email addresses of dozens of Afghan interpreters who worked for British forces. More than 250 people seeking relocation to the UK, many of whom are in hiding, were mistakenly copied into a government email. The Ministry of Defence has suspended an official and launched an investigation. It has also referred the matter to the Information Commissioner. Boris Johnson will meet President Biden today for their first meeting at the White House. They are expected to discuss climate change, the situation in Afghanistan, but the Prime Minister has played down the prospects of a UK-US trade deal in the near future. Here's our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
It was all smiles in the sunshine when Boris Johnson met Joe Biden in person for the first time just 3 months ago at the G7 summit in Cornwall. Mr. Johnson says he hasn't had much of a chance to get to know the US president, but he says they have a genuinely terrific relationship and see eye to eye on all sorts of things. He'll be hoping the reception is as warm when they meet in the Oval Office in the White House later. What would have been one of Boris Johnson's key requests has already been fulfilled. In a surprise move yesterday, the US lifted its travel ban on UK citizens. But other issues could be more difficult. Boris Johnson is expected to push the US to increase its climate commitments ahead of November's crucial climate change summit, COP26, which will take place in Glasgow.
It's the moment when we have to grow up and take our responsibilities. I think we go through, a period of glorious indifference about the world. We've been through that. We've been through our childhood, if you like. We now got to realise that this is a problem that requires grip.
The two men are also expected to discuss the situation in Afghanistan after the two countries withdrew troops. And what about a trade deal? Boris Johnson has been pretty downbeat about the chances of that happening quickly. He told reporters that American negotiators were pretty ruthless and that he would rather get a deal that works for the UK than get a quick deal. Boris Johnson is meeting several world leaders this week, but this meeting will certainly be the most closely watched. Helen Catt, BBC News.
Well, before his meeting with Mr. Johnson, President Biden will address the United Nations General Assembly in New York. And we can speak now to our correspondent, Laura Trevelyan, who's at the UN for us this afternoon. And Laura, what do we expect President Biden to say? He's going to be speaking pretty shortly.
Yes, that's right. He'll be speaking in the next hour and a half, and his speech will be very closely watched here. It's the opening day of the general debate at the United Nations when world leaders get together. They weren't able to last year because of the pandemic, but this year more than 100 delegations are in person, and there'll be a lot of scrutiny of whether President Biden delivers on his agenda of America's back. That's what he's been saying for months now, but a lot of traditional American allies, most notably the French, are feeling rather bruised and saying that actually President Biden's agenda is quite similar in many ways to the America First one of his predecessor, President Donald Trump. Take, for example, that recent new security alliance with the UK and Australia, which sees America providing nuclear submarine technology to the Australians. The French are upset. They feel this undermines NATO. They feel it undermines traditional alliances. So what US officials are saying is that President Biden will make a wide-ranging speech today in which he will try to close the chapter on that chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan, that he will talk about opening a new chapter of intensive diplomacy. There's a lot of speculation that he may make a pledge on climate funding. His climate envoy, John Kerry, has said, watch what the president says. Remember, $100 billion are supposed to be given to the developing world by the rich nations, something Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson was talking about just yesterday. So far, the rich countries have fallen short, so let's see what the US says. Also, President Biden will talk about COVID as well. So a very closely watched speech here at the Super Bowl of diplomacy, as the United Nations General Assembly is known, and a lot of hustle and bustle ahead of that highly anticipated speech by President Biden.
All right, Laura, thank you. Laura Trevelyan reporting there from the UN. And the time is 16 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. A warning that shoppers could face shortages of some foods within days because of the crisis in carbon dioxide supplies. And coming up, Prince Philip, the practical joker, as revealed by his family in a new BBC documentary.
Coming up in sport in the next 15 minutes on the BBC News channel, Eddie Jones rings the changes with 8 uncapped players in, some big names left out of England Rugby's 45-man training squad. "20 years ago, the body of a boy was found in this stretch of the River Thames. His head and limbs had been removed. It's thought he had been trafficked to the UK from Nigeria and then murdered in a brutal ritual. Well, 2 decades later, it is the longest running child murder investigation in the recent history of the Metropolitan Police. And today, they are making a fresh appeal for information. Angus Crawford's report now does contain details that some viewers may find upsetting.
A grave with no name, an unknown child. The police called him Adam. Now imagine spending 20 years thinking you could have protected him.
Vielleicht hätte ich dieses Kind ja auch retten können, wenn ich mehr gefragt hätte.
Remembering how you found him.
The butchered torso of a 5-year-old boy is... I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Wishing you'd caught those who killed him.
The fact that we weren't able to prosecute is very frustrating.
The investigation led to raids and arrests, but detectives never found his killers.
And then it came under the bridge.
Aidan found Adam's body. He rarely talks about it.
That's the hardest thing, is knowing that he was a person. He was a boy, he was a small boy with a personality, and it was cruelly taken away from him.
Before being trafficked to London, we know Adam spent some time here in Hamburg, looked after by a Nigerian woman. Social worker Ria Mates remembers him.
Also für mich war es ein ziemlich schüchternes Kind, ein zwar aufmerksames Kind, aber ja, sehr ruhig.
Ria believes she met Adam at least twice. It's the first time she's ever spoken publicly.
Ich mache mir manchmal auch Vorwürfe, aber im Nachhinein brauche ich das auch nicht, weil...
Regrets too for former detective Nick Chalmers.
You definitely have a tie to a case, and there's this drive to find answers. And the one thing that has lingered over 20 years is the frustration that we didn't find all the answers.
20 years on, a crime with no justice. Adam's true identity unknown. His killers still free. Angus Crawford, BBC News.
More people have been forced to flee from their homes after the eruption of a volcano on the Spanish island of La Palma. There are fears that lava flows could trigger toxic gases and explosions when they reach the sea. Well, the volcano began erupting on Sunday, shooting lava hundreds of metres.
Today accused of involvement in the 2018 poisonings with Novichok nerve agent in
northwestern of the Canaries. Dan Johnson has sent us this update from La Palma.
Well, this is the latest phase of the evacuation effort underway. People are loading up as much as they can, as quickly as possible, because they've been told to leave. So residents have been given a limited time just to grab what they can, to pack it up and to get out, to go to a place of safety. They'll be taken to emergency shelters, and they've been warned that they may not be able to come back here. You can see just how close the flames are and how big the risk is to these properties. And being here for just a couple of minutes, you realise how dangerous it is. There is ash that's settling on my shoulders. You can feel it in the air. And all the time, the volcano is rumbling thunderously in the background. All of these houses are likely to be destroyed, but even any that survive could be dangerous for a long time to come.
Dan Johnson with that report there from La Palma. A vigil has taken place in memory of the woman and 3 children who were found dead at a house in Derbyshire on Sunday. Hundreds of people gathered in the village of Killamarsh near Sheffield to lay flowers and messages of condolence in memory of Terry Harris, her 2 children John Paul and Lacey, and their friend Connie Gent. A 31-year-old man is being held on suspicion of murder. Children with mental health disorders are facing long waits for treatment in England, with one area having an average time of 8 months between being referred and the first counselling session. A BBC investigation has found that a fifth of patients waited longer than 12 weeks. Our health correspondent Sophie Hutchinson has been meeting some of the parents who are desperate to get help for their children, and her report does contain some details you may find upsetting.
That feeling of helplessness, I can't even describe how awful as a parent it is to see that. You're waiting for a service that you know could help your child.
The desperate situation facing some parents with a mentally ill child. When things get tough, this is where Sue comes. Her teenage daughter, who has self-harmed, has been waiting for mental health treatment for almost 2.5 years.
We don't know how long it's going to be before she receives help, but when she does receive that help, you know, we don't know now how she's going to engage with that because of the wait. And as I say, you know, I do wonder if as a result of those delays, you know, she might end up needing medication because the anxiety is now so high.
It's estimated in England 1.5 million under 18-year-olds have a probable mental health disorder. But in the year to 2021, the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, CAMS, saw just under a third of them. And data obtained by the BBC from half of CAMS services in England suggests since the pandemic, 1 in 5 have waited longer than 12 weeks. And in one area, the average wait was nearly 9 months.
Your teachers here really care about you.
Some teachers are so concerned, they're telling parents not to bother with CAMS.
The additional support for mental health is completely overwhelmed as things stand currently. When I have parents that are in a really desperate situation, I'm often reluctant to refer them on to these services because I know the length of time that they'll wait. And sometimes there just isn't that opportunity to wait. You need that support right there, right then, to try and help the child and the family.
Sandra, not her real name, her 16-year-old daughter has waited 3 years for treatment, despite attempting suicide 17 times.
You get told to call the crisis team, who are never there in times of crisis because you can only have a crisis between 8 AM and 6 PM. And then you get referred to adult services who just say, ring an ambulance.
The government says due to the pandemic, NHS staff are now treating more children and young people than ever before, and that thanks to the NHS long-term plan, an additional 345,000 children and young people each year will get help.
She can't imagine living her life feeling the way that she does. And so The consequence of having to wait this long is that it's done an awful lot of psychiatric damage to her, really.
How painful is that to you?
It's devastating. She is so talented. She's amazing at art and music. She's really creative. But when you are constantly trying to just keep your daughter alive another day to hope that someone will give her some therapy, sorry.
After 5 suicide attempts this summer, Sandra's daughter was eventually referred for the therapy she needs. And Sue's daughter, who's waited since October 2018, has now been given an appointment. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
And if you've been affected by these issues, you can go to bbc.co.uk/actionline for details of organisations offering information and support, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 0800 066 066. The BBC has apologised to the mother of a murdered schoolgirl who's accused the former BBC correspondent Martin Bashir of failing to return an item of her daughter's clothing. Michelle Hadaway's daughter Karen was one of the victims of what became known as the Babes in the Wood killings in 1986. Well, our correspondent David Silito is here with me now. David, we've been hearing today from the BBC's Director General.
Yes, the background to this, those terrible murders of 1986. The mother of Karen Hadaway, Michelle Hadaway, was approached by Martin Bashir in 1991. 5 years later, he said, as part of an investigation for a documentary that was never broadcast, and he said he could organise DNA tests on the clothes. Michelle Hadaway says she gave the clothes to him and never saw them again. Now, there was an investigation by the BBC in 2004, and since it's been raised again, following, of course, Martin Bashir and the revelations about the Diana interview, he said that there had been an attempt, and they had spoken to Martin Bashir. He couldn't find them, and they said it is with a heavy heart that they've not been able to give Michelle Hadaway the answers she deserves.
We are extremely sorry for the distress this has caused Miss Hadaway. I mean, I think it is a real... it's very distressing that we haven't been able to give her answers in terms of what happened to that clothing. And I'm appalled that that got lost. I'm appalled by it. And I think it's a serious issue. Very.
There is probably one other point to mention, of course, is a successful conviction was brought in 2018, and Sussex police say that the loss of the clothes has not affected the investigation into the case.
All right, David, thank you. David Silito reporting. Canada's Liberal Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has won a third term in office but failed to secure a parliamentary majority in the country's snap election. The balance of seats is similar to the last elections, and Mr Trudeau's critics have questioned the point of holding the vote. The Conservative opposition leader Erin O'Toole said it had cost hundreds of millions of dollars. The winner of the Museum of the Year will be announced tonight, a prize which celebrates the UK's best museums and galleries. This year's finalists include Experience Barnsley, First Sight in Colchester and Thackeray Museum of Medicine in Leeds. The art fund, which runs the prize, says the entries reflect the resilience and the imagination of museums throughout the pandemic. The announcement will be made during a special programme on the BBC News channel. That's tonight at 7:15. A BBC documentary has shed new light on what the Duke of Edinburgh was like as a father and as a grandfather. All of the Duke's children and grandchildren took part in the programme, to be broadcast tomorrow on BBC One. They portray Prince Philip as firm, but with a fondness for practical jokes, as our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell now reports.
As well as assisting the Queen, he has a separate and independent job of his own.
He ran his public life from this office in Buckingham Palace. He loved the latest technology, and of course he was famously forthright.
You will always make everyone very clear where you stand. I think people find that refreshing, that they know that there's nothing else going on or there's no games played. He's very upfront, he's very honest, and he's very matter of fact.
And he brought that same no-nonsense approach to most things, even to the royal family's barbecues, at which, inevitably, he took charge.
He adored barbecuing, and he turned that into an interesting art form. And if I ever tried to do it, I could never get the fire to light or something ghastly. So Go away.
And the barbecues were the perfect place for practical jokes.
One of the games we used to enjoy playing was when we used to go for family barbecues. Instead of like a mustard pot, we had a mustard tube, a squeezy mustard tube. And you used to take the lid off and put it in your hands.
It gets you to hold it.
Gets you to hold it in your hands, and the lid's off. And I can't remember exactly what he says, but he ends up slamming your hands together.
And then he'd squish your hands together to fire the mustard into the ceiling.
It goes all over the ceiling.
He used to get in a lot of trouble from my grandmother for covering most of the places we had lunch and things with mustard on the ceiling.
And I actually think the marks are still there.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, he enjoyed those jokes. He enjoyed messing around with the children and kind of being a grandfather.
The Duke of Edinburgh, fondly remembered by his family. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
All right, time for a look now at the latest weather forecast for you. Here's Ben Rich.
Hi there, Ben. Thank you. Good afternoon. September is racing by. The nights are drawing in certain ways. It's beginning to look like autumn, but it's not feeling an awful lot like it for many of us. Still some warmth in the forecast for the next few days, particularly across the southern half of the UK, where it stays mostly dry. Further north, a bit of rain in the forecast, certainly not raining all the time, but it will be windy and briefly a little bit cooler. And certainly quite a grey story earlier on for our weather watcher in Shetland, quite windy too. You can see all of this cloud piling in from the west. In most places, it's just wispy high cloud turning the sunshine a little hazy. We will see plenty of that hazy sunshine across England, Wales and eastern Scotland this afternoon. Northern Ireland and western Scotland will see thicker cloud, the odd spot of rain in the western highlands, and it will be windy in the far north as well. Those are the steady wind speeds, the average wind speeds. Gusts could touch 50 miles per hour in places, but to the east of high ground with some shelter, 21 or 22 degrees possible in northeast Scotland. Similar temperatures across a good part of England and Wales. Through this evening and tonight then, cloud will continue to filter in across Scotland, Northern Ireland, perhaps into northwest England, the odd spot of drizzle and some more persistent rain into the far northwest, where it will stay windy, but further south with clear skies, turning into quite a chilly night. There's a hint of something autumnal, lows of 7, 8 or 9 degrees. Could be the odd mist patch first thing, but for England and Wales tomorrow, again, we should see some spells of sunshine, perhaps a bit more cloud than today, and the odd spot of drizzle in northwest England. For Scotland and Northern Ireland, this band of cloud and rain will be sinking southwards, brighter skies and the odd shower following on into the far north, still quite blustery across northern areas and turning quite a lot cooler in the far north of Scotland. Now, as we move out of Wednesday into Thursday, this weather front here will weaken as it sinks southwards, but this is quite an active frontal system moving close to northern Scotland, bringing a spell of strong winds and rain, and briefly, this tongue of quite cold air working in across the far north. So some clouds, some patchy rain across northern areas. Further south, some spells of sunshine. But while temperatures in the south will again get to 21 or 22 degrees, further north just 14 in Aberdeen, just 10 there in Lerwick, certainly feeling like autumn. However, that brief spell of rather chilly weather won't last long. As we head into the weekend, the winds will start to come up from the south. That should bring something a little bit warmer again for all of us. So temperatures back into the high teens or the low 20s. A lot of dry weather, just a little bit of rain around here and there.
Ben, thank you very much indeed. And a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. A warning that shoppers could face shortages of some foods within days because of the crisis in carbon dioxide supplies.
The government needs to solve this in the next few days. It's that urgent to avoid significant disruption in our stores.
And that's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One now, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a very good afternoon.